Welcome to the Doctor's Life podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Dianne. Think of the podcast as a mobile doctor's lounge where we take some time out and explore topics that doctors are interested in related to what it means to be a doctor in today's world and creating a rich, satisfying, and meaningful life, as well as making the healthcare system better for doctors and patients. So, if you are a doctor, you'll feel right at home, and if you aren't a doctor, you'll get a better understanding of doctors and what we think about and talk about. I know you will enjoy the conversation. Let's jump in. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Doctor's Life podcast. Today we have Buck Joffrey. He's a surgeon turned serial entrepreneur. And we are going to be talking about wealth management. And the cool thing about what Buck presents is that he just blew my mind. He has a complete paradigm shift in terms of the way that we think about investing and being wealthy. I'm so excited to be able to talk to him today. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Dianne.
Yeah, you are welcome. This is going to be awesome. So let me tell you a bit more about Buck. He's a surgeon turned serial entrepreneur, as I mentioned. He's also an asset manager and podcaster. And he finished his surgical training in 2008. Since then, he's started multiple 7- and 8-figure businesses, and he's amassed a substantial portfolio of investments in real estate, energy, internet, and health. He's also a financial educator and a really amazing financial educator, too. I was studying some of your stuff, Buck, before we started chatting, and I'm telling you guys, this is going to blow your mind. You're really going to enjoy it. He's the host of the Wealth Formula podcast, and he's an international #1 bestseller of 7 Secrets of Eternal Wealth. And his mission is to provide financial education for high-paid professionals. So I know that a lot of us out there think that we are not in that number of high-paid professionals as doctors, but believe me, we are. So welcome again, Buck. It is so great to have you on the show today.
A nice introduction.
You're welcome. So we always start with having the docs tell us about yourself and how you got to be where you are. I'd love to hear about that.
I started out, went to med school at Northwestern, and you were associated with Children's for a little bit there. Mm-hmm. And then I kind of was one of those gung-ho, hardcore surgery guys that, a lot of people didn't like. That was very ambitious, ended up heading into neurosurgery. I was at the University of Michigan for neurosurgery. And clearly at that point, just hearing your definition of burnout, I think a lot of what was happening to me sounded like exactly like me, where you start blaming patients, feeling like a little bit of apathy and physically tired, all that. Well, 100-hour work weeks back then didn't help either with that. But at any rate, one day I just realized, hey, you know what? This isn't for me, because I started realizing when a lot of my senior residents were getting calls in the middle of the night, the pagers were going off, that they were getting, they had these adrenaline rushes, and I had no adrenaline rush. I just really wanted to go back to sleep. And, I knew I liked operating, so I switched residencies. I switched over to ENT head neck. So I was at University of California, San Francisco there. Finished training there. And ultimately, I was a really academic guy. So I published a lot of papers, did a lot of book chapters, all that kind of thing. And I started going down that route, thinking that, someday I'd be a chairman somewhere. And towards the end of training, I started to really, really hate medical hierarchy and the hierarchy of residency and everything like that. And, the entire idea of academics really was disinteresting to me at this point, because I started seeing that, it was really just a mill, and, a lot of attendings just seemed to be using me for writing their papers so that they could advance their careers and all this stuff. And really, so I kind of came out of it. And for those academics out there, I mean no harm. Right. My view. But it was the only world I knew. And all of the things you talked about, Dianne, about me doing now, about with money, with asset management and real estate and all these investments, I had no idea. I had zero idea. I took one economics class in college, And then that was the one I took pass fail in the fourth quarter of my final senior year just to get it done. No interest in money. I thought that people who were interested in money were beneath me because I had a higher calling. That probably rings a bell for some people.
It does.
But when I finished training, I just, I happened to be looking for different ideas and things. And I started reading some books from Robert Kiyosaki. And it really just changed my whole world and my paradigm. And all of a sudden I saw this thing called entrepreneurship, where I didn't have to work for somebody else. I didn't have to be part of a hierarchy. I could be independent. My fate was in my own hands, and I found it incredibly attractive. And that's where it all started, really. So the entrepreneurship began as just simply starting my own practice and then running it like a business. I still have that first practice that I started 8-9 years ago in cosmetics because I did plastics fellowship. I have a couple guys who work, but from the beginning, I ran it as a business. I didn't run it as a practice. I didn't put my name up on the wall, and all that. So it still exists. I haven't worked in that business for 4 years. Then I started a couple of other businesses in a very similar manner. And for me, it wasn't really about money. It was about, money was the way I was keeping score. But it was really about the fun I was having creating things new.
Yeah.
And then even the investing part became, well, hey, I'm making all this money now. What do I do with it? I didn't want to do what everybody else was doing because it made no sense to me why I would. And so that's where really the whole wealth formula, the ethos of the show began. So,
for people that aren't naturally entrepreneurial, and I'm assuming you are, but let's talk a little bit more about the entrepreneur mindset. Where did that come from for you?
I think a lot. Frankly, I think that there's a genetic component to it for sure. I'm the child of immigrants who came to this country in late 60s. And so I think even having a parent who had a gene that led them to go across the world and try to do things in a different way and do things to better themselves, I think that's a certain kind of person and a certain kind of mindset. And to me, it does feel hereditary because even though I grew up in my dad was an engineer, but he became a real estate investor. He was a real estate investor as long as I remember. Growing up in that environment, I didn't really like what I saw because he did it in a very different way than I do it, where he was very hands-on. He was a landlord, etc. But what happened is when I became an entrepreneur, what I realized was very similar between my father and me was this intense desire to become self-made and to self-actualize, as you put it, to try to challenge ourselves and to see how far we could get, to try new things. Ultimately, my wife's an artist, and she says, I always tell her I can't draw anything. But she says, you're kind of an artist too, right? Because you have an idea, and what you try to do is you take something that doesn't exist and you turn it into something that does exist, right? And that is my art. So this is my art. It just so happens the way I keep score of it makes money.
Makes money. Awesome.
No.
Well, I think that a lot of doctors would love to be in your position. And what we're finding, though, is when I was in practice, this happened where we typically would make our money. As I mentioned before, a lot of docs don't feel like they're wealthy, even though they make more than 99% of the population. Sure. They don't really feel wealthy. So you have a really interesting definition of wealth and what real wealth is. What is real wealth?
Well, it's funny because people were probably listening. You've got this wealth guy on here and thinking that my definitions would be a lot different than yours, but they're really not. When I started down this road, my idea was that wealth was not having to work in order to pay your bills, right? That's what I said. But then I got to that point and I realized, wait a second, this isn't wealth. This kind of sucks. I'm bored. And at that point, I realized that real wealth, in my view, is time well spent, right? So it is being able to do the things that you really want to do, enjoy doing. And I'm not talking about playing golf because a lot of people say that, but in reality, they'll get bored pretty quickly. But what I'm saying is being able to find the thing in your life, the things that you really would do no matter what, whether you get paid for them or not, and being able to focus on them. And hey, it's nice if you can make a business out of it too, which I have. But if you can do that, that to me is real wealth. Now, obviously, that just encompasses one narrow definition. There's the entire health, and you and I have talked about internal wealth, internal contentment, all these things that go along with it that I call holistic wealth. But I think financial wealth is only part of it, but it is a big one. It is a big one because it helps. People who say money can't buy you happiness haven't given enough of it away, right? So it can do things for you. You just have to use it the right way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I hear what you're saying, and that you and I are exactly on the same page, because, what I teach docs and what I love to talk about all the time is how to be fulfilled no matter where you are. You've had the opportunity and the drive and you've acquired the knowledge to get to a point financially where a lot of docs would want to be. But interestingly, our conversation is about being a whole human being and doing the things that are important to us and being happy. And a lot of docs that I talk to, they feel dissatisfied with work on the, kind of, if you look at it, a continuum, you can be dissatisfied with work all the way to like a complete, flame out, burnout, where you're ending up literally, you feel like your only alternative is to leave medicine. But where we start a lot of times is talking about our purpose and what's important to us, and getting out of this, hamster wheel of doing, and trying to gain our satisfaction from what we do without having it be integrated into who we are. What I'm hearing you say is that for you, entrepreneurship, building businesses, and in addition, teaching people about wealth is, to put it succinctly, your jam.
Right. I mean, listen, I think that the reason that I got interested in talking about investing in money is because I did well as an entrepreneur, but I did even better as an investor. And to the extent that we talked about what wealth really is, about this whole holistic, happiness and well-being, one of the biggest challenges that I find my professional colleagues, whether they are attorneys or lawyers or doctors or whatever they are, is that even if they don't like what they're doing, and if they are quite sure they want to leave, they can't, because they've created a life that is reliant on having some subsidization of the things that they currently have. Whether that's the nice house in the suburbs, children's private education, et cetera. And so I call that the golden handcuff. So in some regards, I think that what I'm trying to get at with the financial side of it is understanding that being able to invest more efficiently and making more money out of the money that you're making can be quite liberating, to the extent that, you won't be bound necessarily by those golden handcuffs entirely, that you're actually using your time, that you're currently, making a lot of money, but and doing, but in the background, you're actually creating wealth that is sustainable even after you don't want to practice anymore.
Well, I'm all for that. When I was like, I had the opportunity to spend some time in just one module of this course that Buck has created, along with several of his colleagues. Just module one, like as I was saying before, like totally blew my mind, because it's a total paradigm shift in terms of how we view money and also how to make money. But let's start with how we view money. There's a lot of beliefs. You start off talking about our belief systems about money. And a lot of doctors have a certain belief system about money. What have you seen that is, and how do those beliefs keep doctors from having the wealth that they want?
I have a analogy here. Back in the banking family, my Rothschild family. Mm-hmm. Meyer Rothschild, a couple hundred years ago, was what they called a court Jew. He was a court factor. And back in the day, the reason why the Christian nobleman didn't want to handle the money because it was considered a sin to lend out money. It was usury. So they used to they used to hire out these Jewish people because there was nothing in the Talmud that prevented it. And ultimately, the idea was that in one shape or form, money was dirty. And so we're going to hand it off to somebody else to do the dirty work for us. And I think there's a lot of parallels with the way that doctors see money today. You know, how many people do you know who are physicians who really feel uncomfortable talking about money, talking about reimbursement, about salaries? And to me, that's problem one. Money is not, in fact, dirty. And the problem is the longer that you kind of, as a physician, don't get educated on it, don't empower yourself with some information and knowledge and want to get involved, everybody around us who's involved with health care is going to be the ones who benefit from it. You don't have to go further than most hospitals. The highest paid person there is the CEO and the management, not the physicians. Right. But who's making all of the money for these hospitals? It's the physicians.
Yes.
Right. But that's happened because we let it happen.
Yes.
Right? And it's happened because we let it happen because money's dirty and we don't truly want to get involved in it. We want to, feel like we're above things, that we don't deal with these things like money. We don't care. But at night, when we're thinking about the things that worry us, money is one of them.
That's right.
One thing is, that's step one, is forgetting that, or to really just get past that notion that money is dirty. The second is the idea that I think is part of conventional wisdom, that you should let somebody else manage all of your money without you knowing what's going on, right? So the extent of financial education for most physicians is that maybe they took a class, some sort of economics class in college or something like that. And then they come out not knowing anything about what to do. They go from making $50,000 a year to $300,000 a year or something like that.
Right.
And what we typically do is we turn around to the other physicians around us and say, what do I do with this money now? And then
I say, you're like describing my life right now. and yeah, probably most of the docs out there. This is what we do, y'all. This is what we do.
And then, as it turns out, we asked some doctor who's been doing the same thing for the last 20 years, and maybe they got the same information from some doctor they asked. And there's a firm in the background, a wealth management firm, that has accumulated doctor accounts. They become the doctor account, and because one doctor goes there and the next doctor goes, they become the safe place. They become the right place to go to, right? And when times are really, really good, and when the economy is booming and there's no fundamental flaws in the economy, things can work out okay. Although, if you look at the average returns over the last 3 decades in mutual funds, after all those fees that those nice wealth advisors add, average returns have only been about 3 to 3.5% per year.
Right.
And as you remember, inflation's running at about 2% and probably is going to go quite a bit higher than that in the next few years. So you're at best making 1% of real yield on your money per year. I think first realizing that, okay, well, where am I getting my information from and why is it correct? In other words, when I talk to investors, when I talk to people who are starting to get interested in my paradigm, they all express a sense of doing something wrong. Like they're going against a religion almost, right? It's like they've been taught this orthodoxy of what you're supposed to do with your money. It's conventional wisdom. And going against that conventional wisdom doesn't feel good. It feels like you're almost committing some kind of heresy, right? And so it scares us, so we decide to just stay within our box. So my challenge to everybody, whether they are going to sort of buy into my idea of wealth creation or not, is at least give yourself the opportunity to start questioning the way you're doing things and look at the way others around you are doing things. And if they're doing it differently, wonder if what they're doing might be better for you.
Right. And I think that actually speaks to doing anything in life. And that, when we were talking before about dissatisfaction, burnout and stuff, it makes sense to continue to look at where you are and why you got where you are, in addition to just looking around and being dissatisfied with where you are. So We'll talk about the paradigm that you present because it's really super interesting. But first, I wanted to mention that I just want to have everybody just think about having an open mind, just like Buck said, because right now he's going to present this paradigm that I won't give it away, but it's different from the way that we're used to looking at managing our money. And although it does make a lot of sense. So I'm going to let you go ahead and talk about your paradigm.
Well, I don't know if it's something that I can necessarily summarize quickly for you, but I mean, I think fundamentally there's a few different, what it all comes back to is examining why you believe what you believe. Why do we think that handing our money over to a wealth advisor to invest in a portfolio of stocks, bonds, and mutual funds is the quote conservative unquote thing to do? Why we think that that's the safe thing to do, and for most of us, that's why we think that's the only thing we can do. Mm-hmm. I would just point out a couple things, and one is that, again, conventional wisdom is why we do that, and conventional wisdom for high-paid professionals or highly educated professionals, I should say, and whether they're being paid or not, is all it's doing is when we're really good in school, we're really good at following a curriculum, and then we get done with school and we look for another curriculum. There's no more curriculum, so then we rely on conventional wisdom. And so we take that conventional wisdom as seriously as we took our curriculums. And I think that, and I was talking to Robert Kiyosaki about this, I think this makes us even more difficult for highly successful people to break that mold and do something different, because you do have this constant Pavlovian feedback of success. And to look at something different other than conventional wisdom is risking some level of failure. And that, that's hard to do when all you've had in your life is mostly in success. So my philosophy largely revolves around the idea that conventional wisdom is potentially very dangerous too, and often wrong. I mean, listen, Ed, we used to think that the world was flat. Everybody considered that common knowledge. We realized that wasn't true. You're probably familiar, and the physicians here are probably familiar with I think it was a New England Journal of Medicine article in the 50s that was ultimately found to be funded by the sugar industry that really shaped what ultimately became the food pyramid. Mm-hmm. And as children, I still remember having this food pyramid on the wall of my fifth grade class, and it showed that your diet should primarily, consist of sugars. There was like they showed like little drawings of pizza, sure. Things like that.
I remember at one point, we're just kind of around the same age, but for a while there was so much about not eating fat, but then so like Oreos were one of my favorite cookies, right? So then they're America's favorite cookie. Okay, so
right, sure.
Anyway, they switched from Oreos, and then they had these ones called Snackwells, which they're supposed to be so much better, but they tasted like crap. And then they were so laden with sugar, they just substituted the sugar for fat. So we know now that that's not healthy.
Right.
There's a reason why why did that happen?
Why did that happen? Because we followed conventional wisdom. As it turned out, two things. Conventional wisdom, we found for the most part, is wrong. I think most people, most physicians and dietitians these days would say that the food pyramid is not accurate. And secondly, that we find that conventional wisdom can actually be affected by special interests.
Yes.
Right. To that point, what I would tell you is that the traditional investing paradigm of stocks, bonds, and mutual funds is a paradigm that was created by Wall Street, and it's not necessarily real, right? It's not like something that we just assume is the way you do it. Now, if we look at like the wealthiest families in history, they did things differently because, we talked about Meyer Rothschild, right? The Rothschilds, the richest family in the world. They don't invest in stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. Mm-hmm. They own things, right? They own banks, they own businesses, they own real estate, they own precious metals. And so what I'm advocating for is people to kind of come back and start thinking about the world and their personal finances as ultimately looking at it as a balance sheet. The way a person runs a business, and I have some experience doing that. But, if you want financial education, the place to start is probably to do an accounting class and understand that when a business does their own books and sees how they're doing, they've got assets, liabilities, and they've got, ultimately they've got cash flow.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how they determine the health of their business. Now, you personally, I would argue that the paradigm should be that you should be doing the same with your personal finances.
Yes.
And not thinking about, okay, I'm buying some stuff that goes up and down by, 20% on the whim of anybody, like a bank failure, or if North Korea fires a missile into, the Sea of Japan, and all of a sudden, for some reason, you just lost 5% of your portfolio. What I'm saying is that I think the time-tested approach to creating wealth is the acquisition of real things, and hopefully things that can throw off cash flow too, because that's going to help you unleash yourself from these golden handcuffs. And I think that one of the problems is that when people hear, cash flow and real estate, they start to freak out thinking, I don't have time for that. But what I'm trying to show is that there's an entire world out there, and this is the world that invests not like the poor, the middle class, and even the upper middle class, but the ultra affluent. They invest in these things, and they invest in it just the same turnkey fashion that everybody else invests in paper in Wall Street.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was what really got me thinking. Like a lot of docs, I'm not very educated on financial matters, and I did exactly what you described, where, I went into anesthesia. I started making a lot more money than I made as a resident. You think about where to put it. And so, what did I do? Well, of course, I asked the folks that are ahead of me who are making money and in my group. And I remember we had a meeting, and the financial guy comes in, and, he's going to help us to make more money and prepare for retirement and all that stuff. So I did exactly what you described, this lockstep, stocks, bonds, mutual funds. And I was sitting there feeling pretty good. And then when I started listening to exactly what you described, it reminded me of what my parents gave me advice on that I didn't listen to, Mom and Dad, but fortunately they're still alive and they can hear this. But, they always said, and they came from modest means, and they don't, they're not gazillionaires now. But when they first started out, they lived in a duplex. They rented out the top. We lived in the bottom. That allowed them to buy a better house, and they kind of always did stuff like that. My dad always said, he goes, buy land. Because again, like you said, it's one of those real things. And he goes, land's never going to go anywhere. So I started thinking about it, but I didn't really consider it because I thought, I'm doing well with the stock market. But then I listened to what you were saying, and it's, it really makes sense. So,
and the other thing is, remember that it's not that I'm suggesting that you not have any, exposure to the equity markets, whatever.
Exactly.
My point is that I just want people to understand that there's different ways to do it, and they work. I'm living proof that they work. I mean, and my point is also that if you are open to it, and it doesn't really take that much work. I mean, just listen to Wealth Formula podcast and, listen to a handful of these episodes and see if there's not something that changes your paradigm a little bit. Even if that's, listening to my asset protection attorney or my estate planning attorney or my tax guy. I mean, all these people are just giving information that typically is reserved for the ultra affluent, which most physicians, almost none of them are ultra affluent. Very few people. It's hard to become ultra wealthy in medicine. So I'm just saying, what you realize is that there is a two-tier system of investing. And one is for the ultra wealthy, the ultra affluent, and one is literally for everybody else, from poor people to doctors making six figures. And it's the same. Let me give you one example, because I think it gives you a very unique perspective. So I'm not a huge fan, again, of putting a lot of my money in the equity markets, but there is a product that I discovered that a lot of my friends now, I happen to know a lot of ultra wealthy individuals were using. and I wanted to understand more about it. And it was effectively a type of product that was wrapped around with life insurance. And we learn it right after training, and everybody brings up life insurance right away. They're like, that's the stupidest investment ever, right? I heard that too, and I believed everybody. But yeah, it is, except for the ones that the people who are ultra wealthy do it are completely different from the ones that we saw.
That we see.
Right? And so there's this program that basically allows you to invest in the S&P 500, in an index of S&P 500, and take up to 12% of the upside. And if the market crashes to zero and negative 20%, that you don't lose money. So why don't you know about that? In fact, that is available to virtually every six-figure person. In fact, the banks love to lend on that stuff because if you can't really lose money, then they can't really lose money. And so they're willing to lend you money. So you can borrow, say, 3 times that amount. And now if even the stock market goes up 7%, because you've leveraged it, you make 20% on your money, right? But again, if it crashes, you don't lose money.
Yeah.
So how is it that we don't know about this?
We don't
know about this, right? But virtually every one of my ultra wealthy friends has this kind of product. And it's available to us. We just don't know about it. Why? Because your wealth advisor doesn't get paid for it. That's why. So, I mean, that's just what these things come down to usually.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm sure there's a lot of docs that are interested in what we've been talking about and interested in learning more.
Yeah.
Myself included. So how can they find out more about what you're presenting, what your colleagues are presenting to? And
so, I mean, the podcast is the main thing that we do, and it's Wealth Formula Podcast, available on all the usual subjects, iTunes and Stitcher and YouTube and all that stuff. You can also, if you want to get a very broad sense of my approach to the economy and personal finances, you can just download my 7 Secrets of Eternal Wealth book from wealthformula.com, or you could actually even text me if you want. There's an automated way to do it. It's just text 44222 and then type in Wealth Formula as one word, and you'll be prompted and you get that book as a download. There's that. And really, I think that's probably the best. Those are the two, probably the best ways to learn about what I'm doing and see if it resonates with you at all.
Awesome. Well, Buck Joffrey, it was so great to talk with you today. Thank you so much for being a guest on the Doctor's Life podcast.
Thank you for having me.
You are welcome. So until next time, everybody, I hope you all stay happy and healthy. You can find all of the links that Buck mentioned on the show notes, the doctorslifepodcast.com, or along with the downloads on Google Play and iTunes and Stitcher and all those good places. So until next time, everybody, stay happy and healthy. Take care. Thanks for listening today. If you like what you've heard, be sure to hit subscribe in your podcast app so that you won't miss an episode. You can also read show notes, get links, and contact me by going to drdianne.com. That's www.drdianne.com. And docs, while you're there, take the Physician Vitality Assessment, which will help you more clearly see if you are at risk for burnout.